each new generation of consoles, we often wonder what sort of new gameplay opportunities are made possible with more powerful hardware. It's a difficult question, but the original SSX is one of those few launch games to deliver a satisfying response. With a series of complex sprawling track layouts, SSX simply wouldn't have been possible on previous generation consoles. It's a game defined by its towering tracks, and the increase in available memory and processing power allowed the developers to push the snowboarding genre in new directions. It was a true next-generation experience, and one that was quickly followed up with a pseudo-sequel. But this was just the beginning. 3 years after SSX burst onto the scenes, EA Canada unleashed SSX 3, which single-handedly redefined what an extreme sports game could be while introducing concepts and progression that still feel modern today. It is, simply put, one of the finest snowboarding games ever created. And now, thanks to Microsoft's backwards compatibility program, you can revisit the game on your Xbox One. So how does SSX 3 hold up today? What makes it so special? And what kind of experience can you expect on the Xbox One? Let's jump in and find out. Before we dive into the Xbox One enhancements, let's first step back and appreciate what SSX 3 accomplished way back in 2003. Launched simultaneously on PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and the Xbox, SSX 3 presents a radical evolution of the original formula. With this third installment, EA Canada created a pseudo-open world environment that allowed for unprecedented freedom. While you can choose to run individual races, it's also possible to drop your board at the top of a mountain and carve your way all the way down to the bottom. A full run from the highest peak to the lowest point requires nearly 30 minutes of continuous play, all without a single loading screen. It's a revelation. How is this achieved, you might ask? Well, it starts with the building blocks used to create the world. The tracks featured in the SSX series serve up a delicious blend of smooth curves and steep hills. These curves are represented as a grid of bicubic Bezier surfaces, a common technique used in 3D graphics software but still relatively new for real-time 3D in the early 2000s. This approach enables smoother track design with greater precision when calculating physics. More importantly, using Bezier surfaces helps save memory and performance compared to bespoke vertex geometry by allowing arbitrary variation in terrain mesh complexity. Basically, rather than storing a bunch of fixed polygonal models, the Bezier grid can be translated into an arbitrary group of triangles at runtime, which can then be rendered by the 3D hardware. Using a level of detail system, SSX can tessellate between different terrain levels, allowing pieces of the stage near the player to appear much smoother without rendering the grid at full resolution off in the distance. The memory savings resulting from this technique almost certainly allow the game to move data in and out of memory as needed, thus the game can stream level data in real time right off the DVD. It's this feature which helps make the seamless mountain environment possible. SSX 3 is also a very colorful game with a huge focus on lighting, but due to the adaptive nature of the track, real-time lights would appear temporarily unstable as the LODs are adjusted. Thus, the bursts of color featured across each and every track are derived from light maps, basically lighting data encoded as 2D textures. While this limits what can be done in real time, you can't dynamically alter lighting position for instance, this offline approach allows for lights to display far into the distance without any visible pop-in or warping as a result of the grid tessellation. Character models do at least feature multiple light influences as you move down the course, however. Beyond this, SSX 3 is loaded with rich particle effects and excellent animation, lending even more personality to its presentation. And that's not even touching on the soundscape. The SSX series has long been known for its tremendous use of interactive music. Music fades and changes in real time based on player performance, lending a sense of dynamism to the experience. SSX 3 also features a nice selection of display options, including support for 16:9 widescreen and progressive scan across all three versions of the game. In terms of pixel count, the actual rendering resolution ranges from 512 by 448 on PS2 to a full 640 by 480 on the Xbox. Which is where Xbox One comes into play. When running on an Xbox One X, the resolution is increased by 16 times, giving us a resolution around 2560 by 1920, while the Xbox One S instead delivers 1280 by 960. In both cases, the resulting frame is then upscaled or downscaled to the desired output resolution. Apart from rendering resolution though, the two appear virtually identical, as you would expect. One thing to keep in mind here, while SSX 3 does support widescreen gameplay, the pixel aspect ratio remains unchanged. On an original Xbox, the game always outputs the same 640 by 480 image regardless of the console's settings. To view the game in proper widescreen, TV adjustments are required to properly squeeze or stretch the image to match the selected aspect ratio. This carries over to Xbox One, where the base pixel aspect ratio remains fixed by the game code. The emulator simply stretches the image to fill the 16 by 9 canvas, effectively producing rectangular pixels. Still, while the image is somewhat softened by this process, the result is a game much cleaner than ever before. In fact, at times the resolution increase is so significant that it highlights flaws in the visuals. The low-resolution skybox, for instance, doesn't quite hold up at high resolutions. The interface itself is also highly variable. Some aspects appear to use vectors or even geometry, thus are rendered properly in high resolution. Other portions of the user interface, however, utilize low-resolution art assets that simply don't scale well to higher resolutions. Not much you can do about that, however, since this is emulation. Another curious thing I noticed while testing are the full motion videos. Basically, the Xbox version of the game ships with very low quality, low bitrate video clips for some reason. These files play back at low frame rates with noticeable artifacts, while the PlayStation 2 version in comparison uses higher quality files which play back at a much smoother rate. It's really not an important thing in the grand scheme of things, but I have to wonder why the developer opted for such poor quality video playback on the Xbox. Of course, aside from that and one minor missing visual effect on the Xbox, the subtle bloom effect used in certain areas on PS2, everything else is better, and SSX 3 on Xbox One in particular is now the best version of the game. And why is that, you ask? Simple: performance. SSX 3 is a great looking game, but its performance isn't quite as stable as I would have liked, at least in its original form. On PlayStation 2, the frame rate is highly variable. Using a double buffer VSync setup, it bounces between 30 and 60 frames per second, depending on what's happening in each scene. Most tracks in the game do thankfully manage to hold closer to 60 frames per second, with minor drops from time to time of course, but the city track at the base of the mountain absolutely wrecks the poor PlayStation 2. The frame rate suffers badly in this area, and it spends most of its time right around 30 frames per second. Now, if you play on an original Xbox, things are slightly better overall. Again, most of the main tracks are fine with even fewer slowdown pockets. It's a mostly stable 60 frames per second, and it feels pretty good. This is exactly how the game should be, right? Well, unfortunately, the same city area presents a similar problem on the Xbox. It isn't as severe as PlayStation 2 in that it doesn't occur as often, but when it does hit, we get those same drops to 30 frames per second. It's jarring and it takes you right out of the experience. This specific track always bothered me too, since it meant that SSX 3 was never a completely smooth experience. But thankfully, all that's changed on Xbox One. Let's start with Xbox One X. SSX 3 now hits and maintains the 60 frames per second target 99.9% of the time. Sure, there's occasional very tiny hiccups here and there, but for all intents and purposes, it is now a locked 60 frames per second. This has a transformative effect on busy sequences, such as the aforementioned city track. It really feels great being able to cruise down the mountain without any drops in performance at all. It should go without saying then that the rest of the tracks perform every bit as well. When you combine the higher resolution with super stable performance, this is the smoothest SSX has ever been. Frame rate is hugely important in a game like this after all, so it's kind of a shame that its sequel, SSX On Tour, and the 2012 game both top out at just 30. But how about Xbox One S? Well, for the most part, it's very similar to the X, but there are a few more drops here and there which can pop up from time to time. Take this section. I simply let the game take over in order to reproduce the same sequence on both systems. The result, Xbox One S exhibits minor skips that are absent on the X. Still, at least the city section runs perfectly fine on the S, and really, it's still a massive jump over the game running on original hardware. But frame rate isn't the only area to receive a boost in performance. Loading times are another important enhancement here. For reference, here's the original Xbox version. It's not bad really, but you do have to wait for a little while before hitting the slopes. And it's even a little slower on the PlayStation 2, of course. But on Xbox One X, well, there's not even enough time to insert a timecode here. It's really that fast. SSX 3 effectively has no load times on the X. You can jump in and out of any event almost seamlessly. It's a fantastic improvement. And really, at this point, it should be clear that SSX 3 simply looks and runs better than ever before when played on the Xbox One. It's another example of a game that once suffered from performance issues on original hardware being completely fixed thanks to the backwards compatibility program. And with all of these technical issues eliminated entirely, it's the strong design of the game that shines through. As mentioned earlier, SSX 3 is designed primarily around its pseudo-open world, and I feel that this is one element which still holds up really well today. It works because it offers the benefits of an open world game with the carefully crafted design of a track-based racing game. Basically, rather than presenting a giant mountain with completely open-ended design, SSX 3 instead focuses on a large selection of bespoke, carefully crafted tracks connected by a series of small hubs. You can seamlessly ride from the top to bottom, sure, but it lacks the aimlessness that is so common in modern open world games. It's this combination of handcrafted design with an open world that allows the game to shine so brightly. It's open world, but with restraint. The gameplay loop then is focused on completing events across the mountain to unlock new events and earn cash necessary to upgrade your character. While games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater long featured character stats which could be upgraded, the open-ended design of SSX 3 brought a newfound sense of persistence to the experience that was lacking in those games. But really, perhaps the most important element here is the controls and interaction with the slopes and other riders. The boards themselves connect beautifully with the environment and feel satisfying to control in a way that competing snowboard games simply did not. This is enhanced by things like geometric snow trails that vary in thickness depending on how deep the surrounding snow is. This helps further ground your character in the world. There's just this weight to the characters that feels great today, even compared to modern titles like Steep. Plus there's that element of physicality. You can punch other riders almost like a road rash game. It all works really well. But lastly, there's the atmosphere. It's a strange thing to mention in a game like this, but SSX 3 manages to perfectly capture the feeling of tranquility. That sensation of carving up a mountain peak with only your music to keep you company is surprisingly effective. This is where the benefits of its pseudo-open world design really shine through. During big races, you'll still feel the expected energy of competition, but when you finish an event and find yourself isolated atop a towering peak, a sense of peace and tranquility washes over you instead. This ebb and flow between high energy action and calm exploration is what really holds SSX 3 together. It's really all about these delicate elements all working together to create a cohesive whole. That we can now experience this game on modern hardware with its few blemishes entirely erased only helps further cement its place in history, at least in my opinion. If you have an Xbox One and enjoy racing games to any degree, SSX 3 is definitely worth checking out. But with that, we've reached the end of another video. If you enjoyed this one, be sure to let us know by liking, subscribing, and following us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John, signing off.